Dr. Rodney Brooks is our first keynote speaker. He's a robotics professor at MIT. He's a CTO of iRobot. He's done a whole slew of different things in robotics, AI research, computer science, background in mathematics. You can read about his many awards, credentials, achievements in the bio. And with that, I'll turn it over to him and so we can get started on a substantive discussion.
Okay, no, I'm on. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks a lot.
Uh-oh. Now, of course, my computer, there we go. So, welcome everyone. I'm very pleased to be here talking at this summit. It's the Singularity Summit. I haven't been involved with the Singularity Institute before, so I thought I'd check and see exactly what is meant by the Singularity. And the Singularity, as defined by the Singularity Institute, is the technological creation of a smarter than human intelligence. And the questions are whether this will lead to opportunities and risks. Now, predicting the future is sometimes hard. So I want to take you back to Paris in 1783. And the first hot air balloon floats over Paris. And Marie turns to Francois, and what does she predict about the future based on that hot air balloon? Does she say, I'm from Australia, does she say, well, this is great, we'll be able to travel internationally anywhere in 24 hours? Does she really get upset about noise abatement at airports, which is a big issue from flying? No, that's not the sort of things that she could think about. They're the consequences that happened from that, but they weren't the things that she could think about. She's more likely to have said, no one will be able to breathe in those things, or, oh mon Dieu, it's going to crash, and the city's going to burn down, or maybe, and this looks a little quaint, maybe I'll be able to get up really close to God and touch his face. So I think, at the time when things are happening, you understand the world as it is, but it's very hard to understand the world as it will be. And the sorts of questions we ask ourselves here may well be the wrong questions in the long term. So I'm a little skeptical about some of the worries of a artificial general intelligence, and I'm a little skeptical about some of the promises. I sort of see as a little too much techno-salvation and techno-holocaust. And I don't think things are ever quite as good as we expect, not in my experience anyway, and never quite as bad as we fear. So I'm being upfront about that. And these are the questions that Hollywood asks. Will they be great? Will we accept them? Or should we fear them? And this is a theme in movies. So when we think about the future, lots of people have thought about it. Niels Bohr said it's really difficult to predict. Albert Einstein, this shows he was really a scientist. He was not a technologist, because technologists will not bear with that. And Yogi, of course, he had something intelligent to say. And as I was looking through quotes about the future, I realized we didn't know how good we had it when Dan Quayle was our vice president. It's just great. The future's here, maybe, just not everyone's got it. And then now this one, Alan Kay, every research lab in the world now uses this as their slogan. The best way to predict the future is to invent it, and we're the ones who are going to invent it. But I actually think Arthur C. Clarke had it right. Arthur C. Clarke said, when it comes to technology, most people overestimate it in the short term, but underestimate it in the long term. And that's, I think, what we would have seen in Paris in 1783. Overestimating how good it will be in the short term, but completely missing not the understanding that we have 200 years later. So, in the future, the way we think about the future often is through Hollywood. But Hollywood has a very specific way of talking about the future. This is from I think one of the best movies about the future, by Centennial Man. And there's Robin Williams being a robot. But look what else is in that picture. Oh, is that too dark to see? Damn. Well, anyway, here he's sitting there. He's got a fully functional android, and he's reading a newspaper. Okay, and she's pouring orange juice. She's got a fully functional android, but she's still pouring orange juice. So, what happens in Hollywood? We take the world exactly as it is, and then we add one thing. So in AI, which is one of the worst movies about the future, it was the world as it is, and then they had robots, and then, they added emotion to the robot, and then everything changed. In Minority Report, they had these, whizzy graphics, but they still used regular guns. And they still had regular, Kias and cheap cars and stuff, even though they were able to predict the future in great detail. And my point there that is when artificial general intelligence appears, the world is going to be a very different place than it is today. So it's not today's world and add in this really super intelligent being. It's the world that's going to change over time. And that little asterisk there is, I think that, by the way, we will be long gone, but in a positive way. And I'll come back to that. So the world's going to be different before we have these general intelligences. And notice I said when, not if. I firmly believe when. Boy, that color's really bad there. And underestimating the long term, Star Trek is one of my favorite TV shows. But, if you look in the 60s version, all the technology is wildly dated. This thing on the left there, I think that's a folio or something. And that was Janeway's computer 4 centuries from now, which already looks way dated. So, people just completely underestimate the long term. Arthur C. Clarke, by the way, I think did pretty well with HAL. And I think it's one of the least dating science fictions we've seen. It was done in the 60s, but by 2001, it was still pretty good. So that's one of the reasons I'm a great fan of Arthur C. Clarke. Now, I think the future needs AI and robotics. And there's a varying age group in here, but I see a whole bunch of people in my sort of age domain, the baby boomers who are about to get a lot older. This is the population of Europe in 1950, and we've got 5-year age intervals. This is the a histogram of men and women, and you see the age distribution. You see the notch taken out there by the Second World War. That's 1950, 350 million people in Europe. This is in 2000, and that's in 2050. You notice something? Everyone's getting older. And there's a lot more older people who are going to be at retirement age or infirm relative ratio to the number of younger people. Okay? So not only how are we going to pay for Social Security, who's going to be providing the services to those older people? This is Japan. You see the same sort of thing, 1950, 2005, 2050, and a dramatic change in the population profile. That's happening. The demographics just tell us that. I don't have the same for the US. I've got a different format here, but here you see in red the percentage of population over 65, and we're just here where there's this rapid transition in our society of over 65 about to happen. That's all the baby boomers getting older. And even the over 85s are starting to go up, so there is hope for us. But my point here is there are going to be so many market pulls on providing services. Things that are currently done by the working age between 20 and 65 are going to be a much smaller portion of the population, so their productivity will have to be increased through information technology and through robotics. So there's going to be tremendous pulls on those two things over the next few years. So we will be getting a lot of push, a lot of venture capital, a lot of government research money around the world pushing into AI and intelligence systems. There's going to be rapid progress. There has to be, because of these demographic trends. And there's big issues in labor, and we see that in our politics all the time. In Europe, North America, et cetera, we outsource low-cost manufacturing labor. Everyone hates that. We're getting rid of our jobs. We insource agricultural labor in Europe and North America. Big fusses about immigration. So there's lots of political pressure here, which is, again, going to push us to have different productivity models. And AI and robotics are really going to be part of that. So given those pulls and pushes, what do we know about the future? And one of the things we know about the future is about certain exponentials. Exponentials are important. And, Ray Kurzweil's not here today. I'm not going to imitate Ray, but I'm going to talk a little bit about exponentials for everyone. And one of the great stories about exponentials was really Gordon Moore's article in 1965, where he talked about the exponential increase in the number of components on a chip. This is taken from the start of his paper, and it was in a little magazine. He didn't think much about this article. He just wrote it and was sort of throw off. He didn't realize what a big issue it was going to become. But in the first 2 paragraphs, and this is, I think, one of the best examples of predicting the future I've seen. In the first 2 paragraphs, he says that integrated electronics is going to change us. We're going to get home computers. Remember, he said this in 1965 when computers cost millions of dollars and filled many rooms. He said, we're going to get automatic controls for automobiles, and for those of you old enough to have paddled around with a 1965 automobile, there was almost no electrical system in there, let alone an electronic system at the time. And he also said, we're going to get personal, portable communications equipment, cell phones. So that was pretty good in 1965. And there was a cartoon in the paper where you see the guy selling handy home computers right next to the people selling cosmetics. And I asked Gordon whether he'd been involved in that cartoon. He said, no, this was a total surprise when the article came out. And I think the cartoonist was sort of making fun of him, that computers, cosmetics being sold together, wacky idea, but it turned out to be completely true. So sometimes cartoonists get it right accidentally. But the interesting thing with his prediction was he only had 4 data points. The biggest integrated circuit in 1965 had 50 components. And going back to the single transistor here, and 2 to the 0, and the first few junctions on a chip, he only had 4 data points, and he just extrapolated that. And that extrapolation, can be argued, actually drove the industry until today, because people were expecting this exponential, so they followed the exponential. Engineers would go into their corporate offices in the valley, and they'd have up on the chart what the exponential was going to look like. They knew what they had to be working on today for something 3 years out. I'll give you one other exponential just to convince you that it's happening for those of you who don't know. The iPod. I started tracking the iPod a couple of years ago. Mid-2003, 10 gigabytes, $400. Mid-2004, 20 gigabytes, $400. There was no 40 gigabyte model in 2005, but in the mid-2005, these were the prices on the Apple website, so you can sort of interpolate mid-2005, 40 gigabytes. In 2006, it was a little late, but eventually we got the 80 gigabyte model in September for $350, so interpolate back a bit, middle of the year, $400, 80 gigabytes. And this last week, Steve Jobs announced 160 gigabytes, again for $350, so extrapolate back to June. Essentially, the formula for how much you get for $400 is 2 to the year minus 2003 times 10 gigabytes, okay? And it's just going along like clockwork. And maybe Steve has it plotted on his wall, and he knows when he's got to deliver. So that means by 2025, we'll have 40 million gigabytes in our pocket. And, well, that's 2025, that's a long time away. But I'm sure some of you still have kids in middle school, and you're still going to be supplying them with their iPods by 2015. And 2015, it's going to be 40,000 gigabytes. And 2015 is not very long away. What can you do with that? Well, Raj Reddy started this thing called the Million Book Project, where he started digitizing 1 million books, and it's since been taken over by Google, but let's think about 1 million books. As text, that's 500 gigabytes. That's an iPod 2 years from now. You better carry 1 million books around with you. You can only do 320,000 this year. I'm sorry. We think of the Library of Congress as being a big data unit. Library of Congress, more books than the Library of Congress, or as much information in the Library of Congress. That's an iPod in 2013, Library of Congress. Current iPod, 200 hours of video, 100 plus movies. Last time I looked, this is a few weeks old, 370,000 movies on IMDb. Let's throw in Bollywood, 800,000 movies, say. By 2020, you'll be able to have all of them on your iPod, every movie ever made. Now, if you read the reviews, you know that most of them aren't worth having, so by 2016, which is only 9 years away, you'll be able to have every movie ever worth looking at in your pocket. So, things have to change. I mean, it's overwhelming. And I'm going to get back to this point. New business models have to come through, have to triumph. So I'm going to come back to exponentials. So exponentials are important. Exponentials are happening. There's lots of exponentials. We see one of the new ones is the number of cores on a chip. It's only 3 years ago, our laptops had a single core. Then we got to 2 cores. Now we're starting to see 4 cores. 3 weeks ago, Tylera, spin out of our lab at MIT, out of CSAIL, came out with a single chip with 64 cores, each running Linux on it. So now, we're just exponentially putting the number of cores on chips. So this is happening. But it's not necessarily enough. And I want to now sort of change direction a little bit and talk about some of the robots and AI that I've been involved with, just so you get a feel for where things are and where they might be going, and then bring back and couple that into exponentials. So I've been involved in two fronts. One is building robots through a company, and we now have over 2.5 million robots out in people's homes. That's up from 0 in 2002. That's a pretty big change. And for those, I know some of you here have been involved in AI for a long time. Every one of these robots is programmed in Lisp, I want to point out. So at iRobot, we've also been building military robots. And from 1998 to 2002 was from the initial development to getting them out there. And what really happened was and now I'm going to start a movie, I hope this works. We started, going from academic experiments to really robust systems. And this was, the first thing was very important. So you'll see some tests that we were doing in around 2000, early 2001. These robots have a Linux box inside them. And the Marines like to throw things through windows. It happens. So these were robots at the time to go and look, go ahead of the soldiers and look at things. But it was really important, not just computation is important, the physics is important to get stuff out into the world. And so I'm going to skip past that, but the real thing that happened with these robots, they were still experimental, but along came September 11th, and by midnight that night we had robots down in New York looking in the pile, but we couldn't really do much there. But then we put robots into all the semi-collapsed buildings around with infrared sensors looking for people to see if there were any people still alive in there in these abandoned buildings. And that really changed the mindset in the military. So we went from 0 robots in the US military in 2001 to, by summer of 2002, we had robots in Afghanistan, and now there's about 5,000 deployed robots in Iraq. This is one that we built, the PackBot explosive ordnance disposal, and we've got about 1,000 of them there that are going out every day, multiple times a day, looking at roadside bombs. Sometimes they get blowed up. Sometimes they succeed, and you can see over there Scooby. That's the head of one of the robots, and you can maybe see the marks that the operator of Scooby put on there. I think you can count 17 IEDs, 1 UXO unexploded ordnance, and 1 vehicle-based IED before Scooby on the bottom left got blown up. And his operator brought him into the depot and said, can you fix Scooby? And the people at the depot said, no, but here's a new one. He said, no, I want Scooby. I want Scooby. And there's a real bonding that goes on, which has surprised us. And now, future combat systems. By 2015, 1/3 of all US military missions are meant to be unmanned. This whole restructuring of the Army on the right there is with robots. And we're out in experiments with robots with real soldiers happening. So there's a real transformation happening in the military, and that, of course, is putting a lot of money into robotics and therefore AI. That's another driver here. That's one part of my life. Another part of my life is at MIT as a researcher. This is a former student of mine, Cynthia Brazil, and I'm going to show you a couple of the robots from the last few years. And first I want to show you Cynthia's robot, Kismet, because Kismet interacts with people. And the interesting question, I think, for us is, and I'm going to come to this again, is are these intelligences going to interact with us, and in what way are they going to interact? In Kismet, we put a visual attention system which looks at various features of the world, such as skin tone, and in HSV space, almost all people, or really all people do map into the same area of HSV space. Unfortunately, so does plywood, and we just moved into a Frank Gehry building, but that's another story. So it looks at skin tone, saturated colors, motion, weight those, and decide where to drive the eyes, and then we have the habituation module there so that the robot doesn't stare at something too long. But so there's cameras behind these eyeballs, and just putting eyeballs on there, humans are really good at estimating gaze direction. So when you see this robot, you're able to estimate where it's looking as it's looking around. It happens to be looking for a toy, and it's got a little emotional response here. So you as an observer can tell how it's reacting. But its visual attention system will also pay attention to important things. So here comes a big thing from the right of the image. It's Cynthia Brazil, and it pays attention to her as you would expect a person to pay attention. And by putting a visual attention system, which is very similar to a human visual attention system, people understand the robot's intent a lot more. And I think understanding intent of our intelligence systems is going to be important. If we don't understand intent, we won't know what they're about to do, and we won't trust them. So on this robot, we have a emotional system, a fairly simple emotional system. And here's the robot giving emotional displays at different parts of its emotional space. It's saying a string of phonemes, doesn't understand them.
Do you really think so?
But you'll read emotion into its different
Do you really
displays.
think so? Do you really 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 think so? Do you really
So the
think
lips
so?
are purely there for display purposes. But where its cameras are pointing, change its behavior. So knowing what it's looking at is important. So here we've got the robot interpreting the emotions of humans and responding appropriately. So these were actually with mostly naive subjects being asked to give basic messages in their voice, language independent. And the robot is interpreting that emotional content in their voice and responding appropriately.
Nice robot. You're such a cute little robot. Du bist so süß.
Good job, Kismet. Very good, Kismet. Look at my smile.
Now, it's only looking at her eyes. It doesn't really look at her smile, but she's talking to it. Here we ask the people to get the robot's attention and indicate when they thought they had its
Kismet?
attention, which again is
Hey,
important
Kismet?
if you're going to be interacting.
Okay.
Vite, vite. Regardez. Ici.
Kismet, do you like the toy?
So it's really looking at the intonation in the voice. And here we've got prohibition. I'll just let this one or two of these run.
No.
This one's pretty tough.
No. You're not to do that. No. That's not appropriate. No. No.
Ja,
She did have 3 kids under the age of 5, so. Now this is a common reaction here. The robot does something and people imitate the robot.
Where'd you put your body?
It hangs its head, she hangs her head. Now, this is a fairly simple set of things we have in there, fairly simple set of perceptions, but people really start to feel these things are alive. This is an outtake from one of the people.
It's like looking at me.
It's like looking at me. Now, we added in turn taking, and then we actually had 300 different subjects come in and videotape them. We told them to talk to the robot. That was the instructions. We didn't tell them the robot didn't understand English. We didn't tell them that it didn't speak English. It just says English phonemes, babbles. But it does know about turn taking, which we use when we're talking to someone pretty well. And it does follow eyes, and it follows motion cues of that visual attention system. A lot of people, about 10% of the people just didn't get it. About half the remainder there was turn taking going on but didn't know what to say to the robot. But about 45% of people overall just talked to the robot. This is Richie. He talked for 25 minutes. I'm just going to show you part of that. But right near the start, he says, I want to show you something. I want to show you my watch. And the robot looks at his watch. It didn't understand the word watch, but he used the right motion cue that I would use with a person in order to get their attention. And the robot notices that and does the appropriate thing.
There's no this.
Dude, I want to show you something. This is a watch that my girlfriend gave me.
How the hell?
Notice the
Yeah,
turn
like it's got
taking
little
going
blue
on there,
lights
back and
too.
forth.
You're like, I almost
The
lost it this
person
week.
doesn't know he's supposed to be taking turns. He just falls into it naturally because that's what we do with an entity which reacts
Oh,
appropriately.
You know what it's like to lose something?
Who the hell is you?
So here's another thing that this is with another robot. Here's another thing which we use all the time. We estimate gaze direction. So Christy's just getting the robot's attention. Then she's going to look somewhere, and actually this is something that humans do, but chimps are not real good at. This is a distinguishing feature. It sees her gaze and looks where she's looking. Okay, so that's very important if you're trying to instruct a robot or interact with a robot up close, having it understanding what you're paying attention to and paying attention appropriately. Oops. Now, I'm going to show you another robot, Domo, and Aaron Edsinger is in the audience somewhere here. This was his PhD project, and Jeff Weber, the mechanical engineer, is here too. Jeff and Aaron have a new company here in San Francisco called Meka Robotics, where they're exploiting some of this technology. This is, first, the visual attention system for this robot is much more sophisticated than the earlier one, dealing with people, tracking people, and dealing with self-motion. And this is the Frank Gehry building. Those walls are not straight and distorted. That's the way they're built. But you notice as it's doing its head motion, it's still keeping track of the person, putting the clown nose on Aaron, and distinguishing self-motion from Aaron's motion, etc. And then being much safer to interact with than any industrial robot, because I think we'll want to get up close to our robots and our AIs and interact with them. So here the robot's reaching for this green ball, but Aaron's not afraid of getting right in there with its arms. If you're in an automobile factory with a robot with an arm, don't get this close, because you will regret it. And the robot's also aware of external forces. So here just watch its eyes. Whenever there's some sort of force on it, it's interpolating where that force is, and it's saccading with its eyes to it. So I think Aaron's going to come in from the side here and grab the arm in a second, and you'll see it respond to that force. So it's aware of itself. And I think we need to make our machines self-aware as they interact in the world if we're going to be happy with them. And if you go to Google and search for Domo and Edsinger, you'll see all these movies. This is a 5-minute movie of Aaron going through a whole bunch of different tasks with the robot, a single take. He's giving it objects that it's never seen before. It's moving them around to get the idea of the visual extent. He puts a shelf up there. The robot sees the shelf, but it's not exactly sure where it is. It reaches out with its left hand just to feel it and be aware of it. So it's using force sensing in its arms. So now it's got the shelf, and now it wants to put the object on the shelf, but it can't reach it with its right hand. So it looks down at the object, moves the object around a little bit to figure out the extent, does a visually guided change of hands where it also uses force sensing in its hands to go from one hand to the other. And ultimately, if we let this play, it's going to put that object up on the shelf. And if you go on the web, you'll see it do lots of other things after this. I'm not going to show the video that long. And you'll see it using force sensing as it puts this down to place the object on the shelf. So it's aware of its world. It's able to interact in some ways. But you might think, well, that's a long way from reality. Sorry, Aaron. You know, it's demonstration, but it's a long way from reality. I came to the U.S. in 1977, and in 1978 and 79, I got the chance to work with Hans Moravec at the Stanford AI Lab down in Palo Alto. And this is the cart, which was his robot, and every night at midnight, in the September, October of 1979, when everyone had gone home, and before the computer musicians came in at 6 a.m., we would set up this room with this robot and try and get it to drive across the room. Now, this is being filmed. That the flashes are when the film stops. And you see that when it stops, the camera moves from side to side on top of the robot there. That's because cameras were $50,000 each. We could only afford one. And then it computes for 15 minutes and then moves a meter. So this is a 6-hour run you're seeing here of the robot driving across the room. So that was 1979 at the Stanford AI Lab. 2005, Stanford AI Lab had a different car. Instead of 20 meters in 6 hours, it went 200 kilometers in 6 hours. Same lab, 26 years, 4 orders of magnitude improvement. This is the power of exponentials, and we will see that more and more in our robots. But exponentials are probably, while they're probably necessary, and I say probably necessary because I'm not sure evolution exploited exponentials, I don't think they're sufficient. There's lots of things that we still don't know how to do. So this is an example. I'm going to ask Sam. Sam, what do you see up on the screen there?
Looks like a cylinder on a checkerboard.
And why do you say it's a checkerboard?
Because it has different colored squares and they're in an arrangement like a checkerboard.
Different colored squares, alternating squares. Now, it's sort of hard to see, unfortunately, with this lighting, but see those two squares there? One's a light one, one's a dark one. Let's just strip away some stuff here. They're identical color, okay? But to us, we perceive them as light and dark. We're compensating for the shadow there. And sorry that this projector is so dark. It works better on my screen. I'm happy to show anyone later. Because we do a lot of interpolation. We understand the world quite well. Human vision is very sophisticated. And this is one of the things I use for my class, that simple biological tricks are actually fairly complex sometimes. I think I'm going to skip the camel and the llama, the karma. But I want to show you another thing. We just have no clue how to do this. These are polyclad flatworms. These are worms that are on coral reefs. And they're pretty simple. They eat, they use their fluffy sides, and they put food into their mouth orifice. And they've got a brain which has about 2,000 neurons, and the brain sits up there at the top, and it's got these 4 longitudinal nerve cords that it sits on. And so there's the brain. And in the 50s, people started doing experiments with these where they would cut the brain out of one worm and put it in the another worm, do a brain transplant to see if the body could adapt. And I suspect a graduate student made an error. They never say that in the papers. But then there's a whole series of papers about what happens when you take the brain out, and instead of putting it in the right way, you put it in backwards. Or you flip it over. Or you put it in backwards and flipped over. And in each case, after a few days, the animal is as good as new. The brain can be in backwards. If you put it in backwards, first day it walks backwards a lot, but by the next day it's walking forwards. There's a whole series of exactly what comes online when, if you rotate it 90 degrees, it never works because these longitudinal cords never adapt. But imagine just taking a x86 out of its socket, putting it backwards in a PowerPC socket, and expecting it to work. Our technology doesn't know how to do this, and maybe we need to understand how to do this sort of adaptation. So the future, I think, not just exponentials, we still need to be smart. We still need to figure out some stuff. But I want to now present just some little alternative futures to think about for the singularity here. Perhaps we'll build a general intelligence, and it won't realize we're here. And we won't realize it's there. Could that be possible? Well, 30 years ago, we didn't know about archaea, which are one of the 3 main forms of life on Earth, with archaea, the bacteria, and the eukaryotes. We didn't know about them. And lo and behold, we've discovered in the last 30 years, 50% of the world's biomatter we didn't know existed under the ground. Total ignorance about these things. Maybe we won't know about them. That's an alternative that I think people aren't thinking about. In fact, maybe it already exists on the Google servers, and we don't know. But I sort of don't really believe this, because this relies on it coming into being accidentally. And I don't think, Johnny 5, cute movie, but, the lightning strikes the robot and suddenly it's conscious. I don't think that's how this is going to happen. I don't think, I accidentally built a 747 in the backyard. I didn't mean to. I don't think these things are going to arise accidentally. And, we're going to see, before we have, the fully general one, we're going to have one that's almost as good, and before that one that's almost as good, et cetera. In the same way, chimpanzees are almost human, gibbons are almost chimpanzees, et cetera. So it's not going to happen accidentally. It's going to happen because we want it to. Although, maybe there will be some accidents. Here's an accident that could happen, that we start to see large-scale, unexplained oscillations in the internet. And we see coupling of these oscillations at a distance, and the neuroscientists say, oh, it must be conscious therefore, for those of you who know the literature. But it'll be disruptive and bad news, but it won't be at the level of consciousness. And we'll get over our fears of cyber terrorism, we'll put in cyber inductors and we'll dampen it out. So those sorts of accidents might happen. But there might be some annoying alternatives too that could happen in the future. We build the AGI by 2029, Ray Kurzweil's date, and it knows we're here, but it ignores us. It's like for those of you who live on the East Coast, it's like you treat chipmunks. They live out in your yard, but you ignore them. You don't worry about their families. You don't worry about their relationships. You don't work harder to feed them more. They're just a different part of the fabric. Maybe that's how we'll be treated. Another alternative future. And this, I think, is more likely. We become more and more dependent on home robots for care. They're networked for all sorts of reasons. And a bad virus arises through some mechanism or another. And that virus goes out over all the home robots, looking after me and all my buddies, and one night in 2028, 5 million aging Rolling Stones fans die because their robots break down. And, it's a big fuss. Robot kind gets set back 50 years, postpones the Singularity for a long time. By the way, Keith Richards survives that too. Now, I'm going to finish. I know it's 0. Patrick Winston, this is yet another alternative future. Patrick Winston used to say, he had a pet raccoon. It was really dexterous, but he never thought that maybe that raccoon would build a robot version of itself. And so I sometimes wonder, as I'm working away at MIT, whether the aliens from Alpha Centauri are up there looking down, saying, "Oh, look at that cute little Rod Brooks at MIT, his little dexterous hands and his typing. He thinks he's going to build an intelligent artificial intelligence. Isn't that cute?" And maybe we're just not smart enough. Still, yet another alternative future. And I think this is really likely, that direct neural implants become elective. We've already got over 50,000 people with cochlear implants directly connected to their ears. We've got visual implants in clinical trials, other things happening. Drug enhancement becomes accepted. Instead of the Tour de France worrying about it, they get over it and live with it, and as does baseball. Genetic enhancement becomes normal. Neural enhancement catches on, especially for the aging baby boomers. And out of that, we and our world won't be us anymore. We're going to change our world as these intelligences come online. We're going to be different. We're going to be different beings. We're going to have different capabilities. And who is us and who is them, I think, is going to be a different sort of question. There may not be an us and an them. And this could all happen before 2029, to use Ray's date. I talked about this in a book a little while ago. Okay, I'm going to finish. People say, why is your company named iRobot, just like the movie? And the answer is we stole the name from the same place. This is our IPO. But I like the movie iRobot. There was the elderly academic scientist, and then there was the beautiful engineer scientist, and then there was the hard-pushing CEO. So there's me and Helen and Colin. But we noticed that before the opening credits, the elderly scientist is dead, and by the closing credits, the CEO is dead. But Helen likes to point out that she ended up with Will Smith. So anyway, humans, robots, we're all the same. We're all going to mix up. Virtual reality, entertainment, it's all going to happen together. And I think I have a little time for questions, and I'm not sure how we're doing the questions.
Absolutely. So guys, just go to the microphones. We have one on the left and on the right.
The question over there, is that? The question is, can I talk about the inspiration for the user interface on the combat robot? Yes, on the combat robot, we started out with engineers designing it, very expensive joysticks, force reflecting. We put it out in the field. The kids out in the field, the 19-year-olds started doing bang, 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 pulse width modulation with their hands. We changed it then to a game controller, and now the 19-year-olds in Iraq pick it up, zero training, know what to do.
Great. Rodney, here.
I can't tell. Oh, here, okay.
Yes, okay. First of all, the flatworm experiment you talked about. I'd heard about those before, but I'd always assumed they were fraudulent. So I'd be happy to find out more information on those because.
Well, there's a whole series of papers I can
Oh, please, yes.
send you the pointers to the papers. Now, maybe they were all fraudulent, but there's a whole series of papers in referee journals.
I guess I saw them in conjunction with stuff called shuffle brain experiments with salamanders doing similar things and then sliced up salamander brains still doing the same thing.
That's a different set of experiments.
Okay. And the other thing was you suggested AGI long after we're dead.
No, I suggested that we will change ourselves in the same time frame as AGI.
Oh, okay, because it just seemed very odd to me. You gave the France example of 200 years, but by, say, 160 years after France is the first hot air balloon, we did have World War II and whole cities getting bombed.
Oh, yeah,
and that seemed like a really good analogy.
I was being very careful not to mostly really say anything about time frames because I think they're very unpredictable.
Oh, I agree. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Yeah. There's someone down here, if you can get to a microphone.
One of the potential prices of this symbiosis of machine and human, which I see in the future, and I think your last sense of those is quite correct, will we pay an emotional price for this? In other words, will our dynamic range of emotions kind of shrink down as we become these more technologically enhanced beings?
So the question for the recording is, as we become symbiotic, will we pay an emotional price? Will we shrink down our emotions? And I suspect that there's going to be, again, it's not just connecting to machines. It's going to be drugs. It's going to be all sorts of things. I think it's going to be a very wide-ranging range of stuff. And, it's going to be different, but I wouldn't say necessarily it's going to be damping down or that it's going to be worse, but I think it is going to be different. I'm being really, giving wishy-washy answers here.
When iRobot announced they were putting a lot more R&D dollars into commercial applications, the market killed it. You want to speculate on when that attitude might change and what the thing that will drive the change will be?
Yeah, I think we have a crisis in spending in R&D in the U.S. I've got an article coming out on Exconomy, Exconomy.com on Monday morning about some of the dynamics that have changed with federal funding, with earnings per share, how everyone looks at earnings per share in a nonlinear way, and the effect of buy-dole and the change in federal funding and foreign companies funding research in the US. I think we've got some real issues coming up. It's tricky because, yes, companies do get beaten down for putting money into an R&D because it affects their earnings per share, even though none of these companies actually pay dividends. So who cares about the earnings per share, really? I think it should be about growth. But the market has this set of perceptions, and we're stuck with them.
But wasn't it the attitude about commercial applications versus selling to the government that was the issue?
Well, now we're getting into the details of one particular company. I'll talk to you offline. Yeah, the question again for the recording is, I used to talk about insect-level intelligence. What's my attitude to that? Well, I've got 3 million robots, or 2.5 million robots out in people's homes with insect-level intelligence. I think it's a real commercial success, but it doesn't mean we should stick with just that. Some of the principles from that we've been using in this humanoid robots, and I was trying to explore a different set of space, but really, I tend to think that humans are just big insects. At heart, we're not as smart as we like to think we are. I still believe that at its core. Question down here?
When you learned that soldiers were becoming emotionally attached to the robots in the field, did that change or cause you to rethink any of your design parameters for the interface or for the robots themselves?
The question, again, for the recording about whether the people becoming emotionally attached to the robots caused us to rethink. No, we haven't done that in the military space. But in the home space, we've seen people getting attached. There's a whole set of third-party industries making clothes for Roombas. There are skins for Roombas that you can get. There's some websites. So I think that we'll have Facebook for robots. There really is part of this attachment. There's an interesting phenomenon going on there. Sherry Turkle's looked at it with Furbies a lot, and a lot of projection onto these devices that they don't really deserve from a rational point of view. But we're not rational beings. Question?
Rod.
Oh, okay, last question.
There were reports that some of the chatbots have been equipped with machine guns. The question is, were those ever deployed, number one? And number two, how do you ensure if they were deployed that we don't have friendly fire?
Okay, question was whether, this is not the questions I was expecting. Questions whether, there were reports, he said there were reports that the packbots had been equipped with machine guns, and what do you do about worrying about friendly fire? Actually, that's not true. None of the packbots have had machine guns. The Talon from Foster Miller has had a weapon on it, all with safety circuit and a human in the loop. I think it's an interesting question whether we want to allow robots to have independent targeting authority. I think now is the time to act. There's a bunch of ethics conferences coming up in the next year. I think it's time to put this into the Geneva Conventions. Some governments do go along with the Geneva Conventions, and I think it's time to think about that. Absolutely.
Can I ask a follow-up to that?
Am I allowed to take the follow-up?
You said some governments follow the Geneva Conventions, but apparently not the one that you've done some work for. Is it a good idea to be developing AI and robotics for the US government? And in my mind, that could lead to some of the worst nightmare scenarios. And I'm wondering, what your thoughts are on mitigating against.
Yeah, well, I think that's, in a sense, nothing to do with AI. I think that's been a question which has faced scientists from the time of Da Vinci. Da Vinci was completely funded by doing military work for his patrons. And so that's an issue that scientists have had to deal with for hundreds of years, independent of the AI question. And I think that it is a responsibility of scientists to worry about controls and how things are used. And I think actually the Geneva Conventions have been a good way of doing it. We've seen very little biological weaponry appear because it's banned by the Geneva Conventions, and it has been successful. There are perturbations. Governments do change. Governments can change. People can change the governments. And I think that this is going to be an ongoing question for a long time. But I don't think it's AI specific. Okay, I think I'm finished. Sorry. Thank you.